I mean, think about, like, when an engineer sits down to design a suspension bridge.
Right?
They don't just calculate the load-bearing capacity based on how they, wish the steel and concrete would behave.
Oh, definitely not.
They don't look at this massive steel cable and say, well, in an ideal world, this cable should hold 100,000 tons because it's a very noble, hardworking piece of steel.
Yeah, that would be an absolute disaster.
Exactly.
They have to look at the brutal, unyielding reality of the physics. I mean, they measure the exact tensile strength, they calculate the shear force, they account for wind resistance.
Right. They deal with the materials.
Exactly. They deal with the materials exactly as they are, flaws and all.
Because if you ignore the actual physics of the materials you're working with, the bridge collapses.
Yeah.
But, and here's the wild part, when it comes to dealing with people like in our workplaces, in our geopolitical systems, even our societies, we constantly build our bridges based on how we wish human beings behaved,
You really do.
rather than how they actually do. And then we act completely shocked when those structures fracture under pressure.
Yeah, it's a huge blind spot.
It totally is. So we are taking you on a deep dive today into the architectural blueprints of the human mind.
And it's a fascinating one.
We have this stack of curated notes containing excerpts from a very specific, somewhat notorious framework, which is Machiavelli on human psychology.
Right.
We are going to extract his most potent insights regarding human nature, basically providing you with a lens to understand the hidden drivers behind why people do what they do.
And just to set the stage for you, listening at home, this isn't an exercise in judging human nature.
No, not at all.
We aren't here to label these behaviors as inherently good or bad or to moralize about the state of the world.
Right.
We are simply putting on our engineering hard hats and examining the structural integrity of the human animal exactly as it operates in the wild.
Okay, let's unpack this. We need to start with the foundational concrete of this worldview.
Let's do it.
The notes lay out a very stark, unsentimental premise, which is that human psychology is fundamentally ruled by three main forces:
And those are
fear, self-interest, and perception.
right.
The source text makes this fascinating observation right up front, stating that most people will avoid pain much faster than they will ever pursue virtue.
Yeah, that's a heavy one.
It really is. It just strips away all the romanticism we like to attach to our decision-making.
It does, and it forces us to look at the actual mechanics of human motivation.
Right.
If you think about it from an evolutionary and biological standpoint, even though, Machiavelli was writing centuries before modern neuroscience,
Sure.
it maps perfectly to how human beings process information.
Oh, really? How so?
Well, fast, instinctual survival requires us to react immediately to threats. So, avoiding pain is a low-energy, highly optimized biological reflex.
Okay, that makes sense.
Pursuing virtue, on the other hand, is a slow, complex, high-energy cognitive activity. Because you have to think about it. Exactly. It requires overcoming our immediate selfish impulses for some abstract future good.
Right.
So Machiavelli is essentially arguing that you should never bet your structural stability on the abstract future good. You bet on the immediate avoidance of pain.
Okay, but doesn't this perspective sort of ignore the reality that humans are fundamentally social creatures?
What do you mean?
I mean, human history is built on massive cooperative structures. We build cities, we form alliances, we have these complex trade networks.
Of course.
So how does a society function at all if the foundational layer is purely self-interest and fear? Is this deep dive essentially arguing that we are all just inherently malicious?
What's fascinating here is that he isn't saying people are inherently malicious.
Okay.
And he certainly isn't denying that cooperation exists. What he is doing is identifying the underlying mechanism of that cooperation.
Okay.
In his view, mutual benefit is just another manifestation of self-interest.
Ah,
You and I cooperate because it serves both of our survival needs at this specific moment.
right. It's transactional.
Exactly. But the critical variable is the environment.
Yeah.
When the environment changes, like when resources become scarce, or when the cost of cooperation suddenly outweighs the benefit, that cooperative behavior reverts right back to the baseline of self-preservation.
Wow.
And that is why the notes emphasize that loyalty often disappears when circumstances change.
So is this just like a fair weather friend who vanishes when you actually need help moving out of your apartment?
Pretty much, yeah.
Like, does Machiavelli genuinely believe we're all inherently selfish? Or is he just saying we're biologically wired to prioritize survival over morality?
It's definitely the latter. He views this not as a moral failing, but as a completely predictable psychological baseline.
Right.
Loyalty isn't a permanent trait of the material, to go back to your bridge analogy. It's a temporary state dependent on environmental pressure.
That makes total sense. Think about this in the context of high-stakes corporate environments.
Oh, absolutely.
We often see two massive firms enter into a joint venture, right?
Yeah, it happens all the time.
They share resources, they align their messaging, their executives get up and talk about a shared vision for the future of the industry.
Handshakes and photo ops.
Exactly. It looks like institutional loyalty.
Yeah.
But the moment there is a severe market downturn or a sudden regulatory threat,
They'd panic.
that joint venture fractures almost instantly.
Yeah.
One firm will cannibalize the other to appease its own shareholders.
Yep.
And it's not necessarily an evil plot hatched in a boardroom. It's just the structural reality of the materials.
Right.
The pain of taking a massive financial hit outweighs the abstract virtue of being a reliable corporate partner.
That is a perfect scale to view this on. The executives aren't sitting there deciding to be villains.
Right.
They are following the path of least resistance for their own survival within their ecosystem.
Makes sense.
Loyalty requires a person or an institution to actively choose pain over comfort for the sake of someone else.
Which is rare.
From a purely mechanical standpoint, that is a rare anomaly. It is not the standard rule. So if you build your geopolitical alliances or your corporate strategies on the assumption that an entity will willingly absorb destruction just to maintain an abstract concept of loyalty to you,
You're in trouble
you are designing a structurally flawed system.
because you are ignoring the sheer forces of self-interest.
Exactly.
If we accept that premise, that
Yep.
self-preservation overrides loyalty, and that internal intentions are constantly shifting based on environmental pressures, that fundamentally changes how we interact with society.
It changes everything.
Because if we can't trust the invisible intentions of the people around us, what are we supposed to rely on?
Well, we have to rely entirely on what we can see.
Okay.
And this moves us into the second major pillar of Machiavelli's framework, which is the theater of society.
The theater. I like that.
Because we are operating on those fast survival instincts we talked about, and because we know everyone else is too, we just do not have the time or the cognitive energy to seek out deep philosophical truths about every person we encounter.
We'd be exhausted.
Right. The notes are explicit about this. People don't always judge truth. They judge appearances.
Wow.
Therefore, reputation matters more than intentions.
Here's where it gets really interesting. This sounds exactly like modern social media.
Oh, totally.
People seem to care more about the perfectly filtered photo of a good deed than the actual intention behind the deed itself.
Spot on.
But why does Machiavelli argue that a person's inner intentions are essentially worthless compared to their outward reputation?
If we connect this to the bigger picture, it comes down to cognitive energy costs.
Okay, break that down for me.
To truly know a person's inner intention, to understand their history, their psychological makeup, the nuance of why they are making a specific choice, that requires a massive investment of time and empathy.
Right. And we just don't have that for everyone.
Exactly. The human brain is essentially an energy-saving machine. We simply do not have the bandwidth to process the deep, invisible truth of the thousands of people we interact with in a modern society.
Yeah, that would be impossible.
So we rely on heuristics, shortcuts. Intentions are completely invisible.
Right.
You cannot touch an intention, you cannot quantify it, and you certainly cannot build a scalable societal structure on it.
But appearances.
Appearances, however, are highly visible and instantly processed. They are the interface through which society actually functions.
The interface. Okay, that makes me think of the smartphone in your pocket.
Oh, good analogy.
You don't interact with the microscopic, complex code running on the silicon chips deep inside the phone.
No, that would be a nightmare.
Right. You'd have to be a programmer just to make a call. Instead, you interact with the glowing icons on the glass screen.
Yes.
The icon is a simplification, it's an appearance, but it's the only way you can actually navigate the device.
That's a great way to look at it.
So in human society, a person's reputation is the glowing icon.
Exactly.
We interact with the reputation because trying to read the microscopic code of their true intentions would basically crash our internal operating system.
And this is where Machiavelli's observations become incredibly sharp.
Yeah.
Because society relies on these glowing icons, these appearances, the appearance itself functionally becomes the reality within the societal mechanics.
That's deep.
The notes emphasize that in a world where people don't judge truth, Managing your appearance isn't vanity. It is a core survival skill.
But doesn't that create a deeply cynical, sort of hollowed-out society?
It can feel that way, sure.
Because if we take this to its logical conclusion, it suggests that society doesn't reward you for being morally pure on the inside if you project weakness on the outside.
Right.
And conversely, society will heavily reward you if you project virtuous stability on the outside, even if you're entirely driven by ruthless self-interest internally.
Yes, and we see this all the time in institutional leadership.
We really do.
And Machiavelli would argue that this isn't a glitch in the system.
It's not?
No, this is exactly how the system is designed to operate. Let's look at a historical or economic crisis, say a massive bank run.
Okay.
The public is terrified, right? They're acting purely on the fear of losing their resources.
Total panic.
If the leader of the central bank is internally terrified, completely unsure if the financial system will survive the week, but they step up to the podium and project an appearance of absolute calm, unshakable confidence, and total control, what happens?
The public responds to the calm.
Exactly.
The panic subsides and the bank run stops.
The internal truth of the leader, the terror and the uncertainty, is practically irrelevant to the outcome.
Wow, yeah.
The outward appearance of stability is what stabilized the community. The illusion stopped the collapse.
So the illusion was more useful than the truth.
Precisely. Therefore, the illusion was structurally more valuable to the society than the deep, invisible truth.
That fundamentally reframes the whole concept of honesty in a leadership role.
It really does.
The structural value of the illusion. It forces you to realize that demanding absolute transparent truth from every system or every leader might actually be a destructive demand.
Because the truth might just cause panic.
Exactly. If that central banker was perfectly honest about their internal terror, the entire economy would have cratered. The mask they wore dictated how the crisis was resolved.
Which is why the source text suggests you should stop trying to constantly rip everyone's mask off to find the pure truth underneath.
Right.
If you are going to operate effectively in the world, you have to learn how to read the masks, understand why they're being worn, and recognize that the masks are the primary currency of societal interaction.
So what does this all mean?
Yeah.
This brings us to the most practical and arguably the most challenging part of these notes, the pragmatist's playbook.
Right, how to actually use this.
Exactly. We have laid out these intense psychological mechanics, right? Human beings are driven by a baseline of self-interest and pain avoidance.
Yeah.
Cooperative loyalty is just this fragile equilibrium, and society runs almost entirely on the surface level of appearances and reputation, largely bypassing those invisible truths.
That's the landscape.
So how is a person supposed to actually navigate a reality like this?
The notes clearly state, if you want to understand people, stop studying ideals and start studying behavior.
Should you essentially throw away your optimistic ideals about how people should act in a team or a relationship and purely watch what they do?
This raises an important question. This requires a significant shift in perspective for most people.
For sure.
Machiavelli is advocating for the complete abandonment of naivete.
Okay, not morals, but naivete.
Exactly. Holding on to naivete, the insistence that people should act based on high-minded ideals and refusing to accept when they operate based on self-interest makes you incredibly vulnerable.
It creates a massive blind spot.
Yes. The text states that power belongs to those who understand human nature, not those who ignore it in favor of how they wish it was.
I want to challenge this, though.
Go for it.
If you completely abandon ideals and purely study behavior through this lens of self-interest, don't you risk creating a self-fulfilling prophecy?
How so?
Well, if you treat everyone like a highly rational, self-interested actor, aren't you essentially building a feedback loop of sociopathy where no genuine trust can ever be established?
No?
Did Machiavelli see a limit to this pragmatism?
That is the critical tension in his work. But abandoning naivete does not mean you have to abandon your own internal moral compass.
Okay, that's an important distinction.
Doesn't mean you become a cartoon villain who betrays everyone first.
Right.
It means you stop projecting your ideals onto other people's behavior. You can desire trust and cooperation, but you don't blindly assume it exists without the structural incentives to support it.
Give me an example.
Think about international diplomacy and the negotiation of complex treaties.
Right. You don't build a nuclear non-proliferation treaty on the abstract ideal of international goodwill.
Absolutely not.
You don't hand over your security based on the invisible intention of a rival state.
Exactly. You build the treaty on the rigorous study of behavior and self-interest.
You establish mechanisms of verification.
Yes, you create mutual economic benefits that make cooperation highly profitable, and you establish consequences that make betrayal incredibly painful.
So you align their self-interest with your desired outcome.
Precisely. You are dealing with the state exactly as it is, not as you wish it to be.
You use the actual physics of their psychology to build the bridge.
There's the bridge again.
Right. You aren't judging the rival state for prioritizing its own survival. You are utilizing their need for survival as a structural support for the treaty.
Yes.
This is incredibly applicable for you, the listener, whether you are managing a complex multinational supply chain or navigating tricky stakeholder dynamics in your own organization.
Oh, absolutely.
If you manage a team based purely on the ideal that everyone should inherently want to sacrifice their weekends for the good of the company,
You're going to have a bad time.
you are going to be constantly frustrated when people protect their own time and energy.
And your frustration will stem from your own flawed blueprint, not from their behavior.
Right.
Because their behavior, protecting their energy, optimizing for their own reputation within the company, is entirely predictable under the Machiavellian framework.
But if you apply this pragmatist playbook, you stop giving speeches about the nobility of the corporate mission, and you start watching behavior.
Yep.
You recognize that one executive is driven by a fear of irrelevance, and maybe a key vendor is driven entirely by the need for a predictable cash flow.
Exactly.
So you align the project structure so that the executive gets highly visible credit, satisfying their need for reputation.
Right.
And the vendor gets phased milestone payments, satisfying their need for security.
And everyone is happy.
You aren't manipulating them in a malicious way. You are just speaking the language of their actual psychological drivers.
You are operating in reality. When you stop expecting people to live up to perfect ideals, you stop being continually disappointed and you start becoming highly effective.
Yeah.
Power, in the context of these notes, isn't about dominating other people.
Okay.
It is about having agency and control over your own projects, your own boundaries, and your own life, because you understand the terrain you are walking on. You know where the sinkholes are.
It's the difference between being a victim of human nature and being a student of it.
Perfectly said.
When you study behavior, when you watch where the money moves, where the resources go, and how people act under stress, rather than listening to what they say in their perfectly crafted press releases, you can anticipate their moves.
Yes.
You aren't blindsided when the joint venture collapses or when a crucial vendor renegotiates terms during a crisis, because you never assumed the relationship was immune to the pressures of self-interest in the first place.
You built contingencies into the contract.
Exactly. You took control of the situation.
And that is where the profound utility of this framework lies. It is a protective mechanism. It strips away the comforting illusions, yes, but what it leaves you with is a solid foundation.
Right.
It allows you to operate in the world as it actually is, which ultimately is the only place where you can actually make a durable impact.
Let's pull the threads of this together, because we have covered some incredibly dense architectural ground today.
We really have.
We started by examining the foundational materials, the reality that human beings are fundamentally propelled by self-interest and a highly optimized biological instinct to avoid pain.
Right.
We looked at how this mechanism makes abstract concepts, like unconditional loyalty, really fragile when placed under the stress of changing environments.
Yeah.
From there, we explored the theater of society, breaking down the cognitive bandwidth that forces us to rely on heuristics.
Because the processing cost of deep truth is just too high.
Exactly. Society runs on the currency of perception, the glowing icon on the screen.
Right.
And in moments of crisis, the outward appearance of stability functionally becomes the reality that dictates group behavior.
And that led us to the ultimate application of these notes, which is the necessity of dropping our naivete.
Yeah.
By shifting our focus away from how people ought to behave and rigorously studying how they actually do behave, we gain the ability to align incentives and build structures.
Whether those are treaties, contracts, or boundaries.
Exactly. Structures that can actually withstand the pressures of the real world.
Having this lens is, well, it's like looking at the structural stress points of a building.
Yeah.
It doesn't mean the building is ugly. It just means you know exactly where the weight is being carried.
That's a great way to put it.
It can help you better understand those intense, sometimes baffling geopolitical shifts or institutional decisions without feeling overwhelmed by the apparent chaos of it all.
Right.
When an entity acts out of pure self-preservation or when a system violently defends a false reputation over an uncomfortable truth, you don't have to spiral into despair about the state of humanity.
No, you
You
don't.
can simply look at the blueprint and say, well, the physics of human nature are at work. You can see the forces acting on the bridge.
But before we wrap up this analysis, there is a final thought based on these notes that we should really leave on the table.
Now, let's hear it.
If society fundamentally relies on appearances because the cognitive cost of truth is too high, and if the most effective actors are those who deeply understand the mechanics of self-interest, what happens when someone successfully masters the absolute perfection of the glowing icon?
Oh, wow.
If an individual learns to project the appearance of flawless virtue, pure altruism, and absolute reliability, while internally acting purely out of calculated self-preservation, how would the system ever identify them?
They'd be invisible.
Are the masters of the illusion the ones who ultimately hold the power to rewrite the code? And if you are only equipped to read the masks, how would you ever spot the architect?
That is a lingering thought. We spend so much energy optimizing the interface, we might not even realize who is writing the underlying code.
Exactly.
Keep your eyes on the structure, study the actual behavior, and respect the physics of the materials. Until next time.